plenty of talks about teaching, well, to teach, but I haven't really given any about teaching. So this is somewhere in between how I taught the class and what the class was, and we'll see how it goes. So we've had things, I have the distinct honor of not having gone first, and I'm glad about that. And we've had various things where, poster boards and poster papers on the walls and walk around and sign up things. And I'm an engineer, and I'm not sure that would have gone over as well for engineers. So I used the technical version. And this is Socrative.com. You're welcome to go to it if you want. And so it's www.socrative.com. And there's first thing you'll get is a choice for signing in as a student or as a teacher. And so if you sign in as a student, then you enter my name as the room name, and you can go from there. And so that's what I did. The thought was that when we're starting a conversation, I'd at least allow for the possibility of some anonymity. And so the way it worked is that I could look at a website and see what the answers were. I gave a quiz where, let's see, I guess I may as well get out of that, and I'll show you what it looked like from my side. Or from the student side, I suppose.
Only an engineer can get this to work without an IT person. Did you notice that?
No, I don't want to be a teacher, I want to be a student. Sorry. Yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
I usually do this on different screens, but then you can't see. So if you log in as a student, then you get, I can spell my name right. Then you get a view something like this. So I started a quiz, is what it amounts to. And we went through different scenarios, different cases, and I presented them in different ways. And then I asked people what ethics principles were relevant. And so they had the choice, you can answer more than one, you can answer one, whatever, but the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative principles were available, and you could enter them in an anonymous sort of way. And so that was the beginning of the conversation. And so I put that in the beginning of my slides just because it's not, I did it in the beginning of class. And we got it out of the way, and then I could go forward and talk about whatever I'm going to talk about. And so one of the things that I've often been told about giving a talk is to know your audience. And I know that at least not many of you are mechanical engineers, so I figure I need to do a little bit of an introduction. And so this is a t-shirt I found. I'm a mechanical engineer. To save time, let's assume that I'm never wrong. I also learned the benefit of Kevin giving a talk. I don't have clowns. I don't have people coming in, but I at least can give pictures of engineers so you have some idea of what they're like, right? Okay. So this was a propaganda slide from a college, and mechanical engineers do lots of things, and in this talk, I'm focusing on mechanical engineers developing medical technologies, we'll call it. And so we started with a conversation about the ethics initiative principles for the Daniels Fund, and I didn't have the benefit of the stand-up list of them, but so we talked about it in this way. And then we moved into a conversation about societies, and so the American Society of Mechanical Engineers is one that's at the forefront of this for mechanical engineers at least. And we talked about the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative principles, and I left them on the left, and I did that in a number of slides so people could see them, and so we could have the conversation that way. And so the beginning of this code is pretty straightforward. When there's another section about the canons, And here we had more of a conversation, and you can go through and essentially match up the Daniels Fund principles with the canons of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And so we went through these in a little bit more detail than I'm probably going to go through here, but from the society perspective, from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the big perspective is that engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Okay, so engineers are going to protect society, as it were. And then I'm at the intersection of engineering and medicine, is the way I put it. And my interests are in biomechanical engineering, musculoskeletal engineering, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later. I'm not that kind of doctor, but the kind of stuff that I do is in collaboration with doctors often. And so this is the American Code of Medical Ethics. The earlier version certainly was the Hippocratic Oath, and a lot of language that is probably not quite up to date. And so this is a more up-to-date version of that. The essential principle of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm, but there are other few details in there. And so American Medical Association Code of Ethics, and we went through this a little bit more, talked about differences, but the big difference is that a physician, while caring for a patient, regards responsibility of the patient as paramount. And so there's the conflict, as it were. Engineers are concerned about society, the public, and doctors are concerned about one specific patient. And sometimes that leads to conflicts. And so I went through, and this is the first World Congress of Biomechanics, August 1990. And they invited a speaker, Michael Davis from the Center of Study of Ethics in the Professions, and he gave an address on ethics at this intersection. And so, we highlighted a few things. Biomechanical engineers are not ordinary engineers, and I'll let you think whatever you want about that. But, so the point is here, his point was that a biomechanical engineer working in a hospital may be the only engineer around. I don't work in a hospital, but in the case of a gate lab or in another few sets of circumstances, there may be an engineer that provides support to physicians, whatever. And so we go on, the hospital may be an environment where ordinary engineering ethics is not appropriate. And he goes on to point out, like I did, that engineers generally agree that the safety, health, and welfare of the public comes first, and physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, the safety, health, and welfare of the patient, not the public, comes first. So some challenges. So I'm in musculoskeletal biomechanics. I just put this up so Tracy could practice saying it. And so I'm concerned there are lots of intersections at engineering or at various fields in medicine. I'm concerned with primarily fracture risk, bone fracture risk, trying to predict which little old lady and little old man is more at risk for suffering a bone fracture before it happens, and then how to prevent that in them as an individual rather than one-size-fits-all treatment. And so we talked about this in my musculoskeletal biomechanics class, and so we talked about how engineering shows up in terms of basically enabling activities for some people that can't, or enhancing activities for some people that can, and maybe in terms of protecting or trying to reduce the risk of suffering injury. And so I went through a number of scenarios, and we started simply, a lot of engineering in general, I guess the basis of engineering is trying to develop a model of some physical reality. And George Box was a statistician, but George Box says that every model is wrong, but some are useful. And so the hope is that this is a model, early 70s, mid 70s, that a guy at Harvard used to model runners' legs. And so he was also modeling this intersection at the track is what he's modeling, compliance, stiffness of the track, and how it affected runners, injury, things like that. And so he went on to build this track, still being used at Harvard, the Gordon Indoor Track, and this tuned track that he set the compliance based on this relatively simple mechanical model and ended up reducing the forces in impact for anybody, not just for trained runners, but roughly by 11%. Anecdotally, at least, they decreased injuries by about 50%, and they also increased running speeds by 2 to 3%, 5 seconds a mile. And so we started to talk about this. And so it's good that they're decreasing injuries, they're decreasing forces. It's easy to see that that's good. But then it gets a little bit more complicated when these major events, running track events, are held, and it's fair in that everybody's running on the same track, but at the same time the track's increasing running speeds. And so maybe it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of looking at it from an ethical perspective. Is that the right thing to do or not? And so it's a balance. And there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of, well, if we don't affect the track, if we don't modify the track, well, certainly we could do something with respect to shoes. And so Nike, in fact, set out to build a shoe, to make a shoe with the sole purpose of having a couple of marathon runners being able to get below a 2-hour marathon. And so, again, there are lots of benefits for doing that, but you start to get into a little bit more of a gray area about ethics. Is that the right thing to do in terms of the sport? And that's the question. So they were called magic shoes. What if they really work? And if these shoes make a sub 2-hour marathon feasible, what does that mean for the sport? And so we could talk about that in terms of ethics and stepping back and let's improve performance, but it comes with a few things that maybe you aren't considering. And so then, well, if we're not going to modify shoes, Oscar Pistorius here was, 2012 Olympics. I guess he's known a little bit more recently for some worse things, but at any rate, he was a double amputee, lost both his legs at 18 months or so, I think. And so he had these, he was called the Blade Runner for fairly obvious reasons, and he did well at his sport. And so he entered into the Paralympic Games, for instance, and what I did in a lot of cases was, rather than spend a lot of time talking about, here's what we're going to talk about, I just use videos. However many pictures they are, I let them speak for themselves. And so, here's a video.
I would say Oscar Pistorius is going to, I would say Oscar's going to get it. I'm going to go out on a limb. Wait for a second, and I think Arnie Fudio's going to get bronze.
So he's competing against like athletes. Everybody's got either a single or double leg amputee, or is a single or double leg amputee.
Paralympics, London 2012. We're about to see the greatest Paralympian ever. Is this going to be the moment when he gets shot? And off they go. And it's a great start for Arnie Fuddy. Arnie Fuddy in the lead at the moment as well, but Oscar Pistorius has already gone past Blake Leaper. It's the two South Africans in the lead, and here goes Pistorius. Look at him go. Oscar Pistorius absolutely storming away. Oscar Pistorius, is he going to, he's been caught, is he? Oscar Pistorius just tying up. Oh my goodness, he's been caught by Oliveira of Brazil. Well, that's absolutely extraordinary.
And so, this was a conversation. And so we moved into, well, here are all these people competing on the same sort of basis, but now they're allowed to compete. Engineering has provided them with the ability to compete. And so we had a conversation. And so Tracy suggested required somewhere in there that I make this interactive. And so what ethics principles are related to this? This scenario where engineers allow athletes to compete.
Viability.
Sure.
Transparency.
Yeah. Pretty easy to see what they're doing. Anybody else?
Fairness.
Yeah.
That they're able to compete.
Yeah. Some questions about double versus single leg amputees. Is it different? Is it the same? Are they competing on the same level? Anybody else? So the interesting thing about Oscar Pistorius is he's one of very few Paralympics to also compete in the Olympics. And so we moved on to, oops, I'm going backwards. We moved on to the Olympics. So this is a preliminary heat in the 2012 Olympic Games, 400 meters, so it takes a little bit longer, but at any rate, there's Oscar Pistorius competing against, what do you say, able-bodied athletes. And there are conversations here, and there was a lot of controversy about whether he could compete, whether he should be able to compete, because does he have an advantage or not? Well, he doesn't have any legs, but he's got modified versions of them, right? Adaptive legs. And do they provide him with an advantage or not? And so that's the question.
Pistorius will always find himself in a little bit of difficulty in the first half of the race, but he does run even pace, I can assure you, and he should come back a little bit. And the Jamaican McDonald going very strongly, also Santos, and the two athletes on the inside, probably Gildan of Russia going the better of the two on the inside lane. And Pistorius now should make a little bit of headway to the, as they come off the final bend of the straight, but it's McDonald and Santos, these two. The junior champion just taking over. It's a tidy run indeed, and here comes Pistorius. I said to you that he runs even pace races, and he does, and he's going to qualify for the semi-final, and he's done it brilliantly, hasn't he? So, Santos wins it, Pistorius in second place, easing down. Gildan in third, the Russian, and 45.04, and really...
And so it's a little bit more complicated now, right? And so again, we had a conversation. And so here's the conversation. What principles, do the principles change? Do the ethics of the situation change? He didn't win, but he beat plenty of people and he got to advance. So how does that affect your view on him being able to compete? He was allowed to compete. He went through a fight to be able to compete, and they allowed him to compete. But is it fair? Is it ethical for him to be able to compete? What do you think?
Of course, I would kind of focus at this point on the rule of law and what the parameters were,
Sure.
the agreed parameters.
Mhm.
And if he meets those parameters, then it seems reasonable that he compete. Whether or not it's completely fair or equal, to me, is less important than if these are the rules, then you get to do it.
Sure. But that's an interesting point. Are the principles, can you order them in terms of importance? Are they all equally important? Or, you know, because he's allowed to compete, does that mean the others are less important? You know, I don't know. But it's a conversation we had. What do you think, Tracy? You're
Well, it's
making faces.
interesting. I mean, you know, like the transparency, it's obvious that he has some kind of alteration
Sure.
that makes a difference of how he performs, that you can see. Yet, and the doping and the steroids, which is huge in track,
Yeah.
you can't
Right.
see. They have to test for it.
Right. But even if you can see his
Yeah,
difference, it's not clear whether it
it's fair.
helps or not, right? And so, you know, there's certainly advantages to having regular legs, right? And the question is, are there advantages or disadvantages? He's at a disadvantage because he doesn't have legs, but does the fact that he's got these artificial legs that are tuned or built to running, does that give him an unfair advantage? And so we had a little bit of a conversation about that.
What if you look at the population issue, right? So there is a population of amputees. Not every one of those individuals is then running a race or is capable of running that race.
Sure.
And so just as most of us are really not going to be in the Olympics, too, it's just a different population from which somebody might be drawn.
Right.
I don't know what kind of process, you know, or how you would factor that in.
Right.
But
And when you move to the international level, there's also the question, can your country afford to give you that opportunity, right?
Mhm.
Is that fair? Is it whatever, right? And so it became a more interesting conversation. And so we moved forward. And so we stuck with sports a little bit, and this one I think is probably going to be really loud, so I'm going to turn it down a bit.
I always wake my class up with that.
So this is certainly a different kind of video. Speedo put this one out, right? And it's a marketing video. Whether you remember or not, these, well, at least a version of these suits were banned from the Olympics because it gave, or it was declared to give people an unfair advantage, right? And so here's something where an engineer decided that he could enhance performance, but somebody else decided that she crossed the line in terms of giving people an advantage. And the suits essentially captured air within them and added buoyancy, so it was easier to swim. And so is that fair? The suits didn't cost a whole lot of money relatively. I mean, it cost more than going to whatever Dick's Sporting Goods and getting a $10 suit, but you know, on the order of hundreds of dollars, so certainly more affordable than blades or things like that, but they were also declared to not be allowed. What's the opinion about these? I mean, how does these go against some of the ethics principle? Do these suits? I mean, certainly rule of the law is somebody decided, you know, a governing board decided that you're not allowed to use these suits. Is it fair? Should you be able to use the suits?
So I understand why someone would argue against using them, but if they are available to anyone and everyone, and some people choose to use them and some people choose not to use them,
Sure.
then perhaps a situation like that is a little more I guess it's a matter of opinion, but a little more ethical than technology where someone's missing their legs.
Right. You know, so again, it's, do you order ethics principles differently? Are some more important than others? You know, I mean, we can even talk about viability. If you're advancing the sport, because I mean, that's the goal, right? To advance the sport, to be faster, to compete. Does that violate the principle? It starts to get a little bit gray, right?
I'm wondering if so you went through this with, so I'm understanding, with your students.
Yes,
This is sort of a
yes.
process of implementing
Yep.
the ethics initiative. Okay, so did they talk about a priority of the principles in the context of this and as it related to the engineering principle of the best interest of the public? Did you guys kind of
We did have that conversation. And so this, veers a little bit from the patient, but at the same time, if we can help the specific athlete, should we? Right? So we did have that conversation, at least some, a version of it, right?
And what about the public, the interest of the public as the sort of the engineering lens on things?
Right, but, it's how do you look at it? There are lots of, so if you consider stakeholders, certainly athletes are stakeholders, countries are stakeholders, the audience is a stakeholder. So if people get faster, then it increases the interest, right? If they're gonna break records, then, I mean, that's why people watch the Olympics, other than, patriotism, things like that, right?
Right.
To see people compete. Given that they're likely not going to compete, let's see our guy or our person go out and do better than everybody from the other countries. And there's a lot of pride with, Michael Phelps, for instance, right? He had the good fortune of going to the high school that I did. So, joke. He did go to the high school that I went to.
understand now.
A few years earlier, I went a few years earlier than he did. But, and the street nearby is now named after him. I don't have any streets named after me, but that's the way it goes.
Not yet.
Not yet. And so it was this conversation.
So
And
would it be fair if then everybody had that suit? I mean, this was your required suit and you got to wear it and then either you were faster or you weren't?
It seems reasonable. I guess the question is why the International Olympic Committee decided it wasn't fair, and I don't know that. But, easily you can see that they're more accessible than other things like, artificial legs.
I mean, for instance, I don't know about like ice skating, right? If you have really more effective ice skates because you're in a wealthier country and you've had more chance to practice with them, does that make you a better ice skater? I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
Sure.
enough about to say where is the equipment versus the athletic practice.
No, I think it's always about getting that edge, whatever that edge is, right? And certainly no matter what country you're from, if somebody's posing you as this, Olympic athlete to represent your country, you're probably going to have better skates or better whatever than the majority of the people in the country.
Well, it goes down to the rule of law requires an arbiter of those laws. I remember when this controversy, I'm like, yeah, well, probably there's no law that says that you have to fix propellers to the swimsuit as well. But at some point, someone has to make a decision
Sure.
that guides our ethics.
Right. But how do you, right?
Yeah.
How do you make that decision? How does somebody make that decision? And it's, it's easier to see that you probably shouldn't affix propellers to people. But if you keep pushing, right, who knows where things head. Okay, so then we moved on back to medicine a bit. And so this is a Da Vinci surgical system. And I'll let the
The Da Vinci robotic
Video
surgical
speak.
system brings technological innovation to the operating room. At Loma Linda University Medical Center, patients have the option of minimally invasive robotic-assisted surgery. Robotic surgery relies on trained surgeons who control the entire operating process. The robotic instruments only move when directed by the surgeon, and the tiny nature of the tools in comparison with human hands allows for unprecedented precision. While traditional surgery requires a large incision so that a surgeon's hands can maneuver inside the patient, minimally invasive surgery is performed through several very small incisions. The minimally invasive nature of the surgery provides a number of advantages for patients. Major benefits include reduced blood loss, less post-operative pain due to the smaller incision size, and much quicker recovery time. Many patients leave the hospital the day after their surgery and return to regular activities in 3 weeks. While not every patient is a good candidate for robotic surgery, the Da Vinci system also expands the pool of patients eligible for surgical treatment. Robotic surgery represents a major breakthrough in medical technology, but since it is essentially the miniaturization of the surgical technique, patients without advanced medical training can still understand the process and make an informed decision about their treatment. The system is equipped with 4 robotic arms, all easily manipulated by the surgeon. One arm houses 2 endoscopic cameras, and the other 3 arms perform the delicate surgical procedures. The surgeon sits at an ergonomically designed terminal, and using images from the 2 offset cameras and the camera tube, is able to see the surgical field in 3-dimensional high definition. By placing their hands in controllers, the surgeons direct the robot's every movement, foot pedals add additional control, and allow the surgeon to perform additional tasks such as cauterization. Like a human being, the robot's hands are moved by rotating wrists, allowing for a full range of movement. This movement is so fluid that it can be used to make graceful and precise movements and allows surgeons the wide range of movement necessary to spare as much healthy tissue as possible. Robotic surgery offers patients the option of minimally invasive surgery, where the surgeon has unparalleled visualization and movement capabilities, resulting in better patient outcome.
So that's pretty cool, right?
So,
And, you know, so if your teddy bear needs surgery, then certainly you'd rather have a robotic surgeon. Well, it's a mechanical sort of puppet, right? Except it's got some controls. So are there ethics issues here? Do any of the principles come to play here that don't in these other situations that we've talked about?
Transparency. So the doctor can tell you up front that if you choose to do your surgery with me, this is how we do the surgery. Versus another surgeon who uses his bare hands.
Yeah.
And the public can decide for themselves.
Yeah.
I guess, not to get ahead of you, but where the ethics, in my opinion, really come into play is once AI comes on board, when the machine is doing the surgery completely.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Scary thought.
I guess fairness, because I don't know if all insurance, like I'm not familiar if
I don't know.
insurance pays for it, so is it equitable across all patient populations? Does everyone have access? I think my brother had robotic surgery like 10 years ago, and he had to travel out of state to
Mhm.
find a surgeon to do it at his own expense. So again, I don't
Sure.
think
I mean, they
people
certainly
without
are.
the means would be able to do that.
Well, and lots of hospitals probably don't have the means to bring in this technology, right? They're not inexpensive systems. There have been several versions over the last, how many, 15 years, I suppose.
and accountability. We had, because we had, one of my students actually wrote a case we used for our case competition once about a machine in the hospital that malfunctioned because of, you know, and the question was, you know, the hospital was saying, well, it's the manufacturer, and then they're saying it's the users, and then
Right.
they're saying the training, so it's like who's going to take responsibility if something goes wrong?
Sure. And so, you know, this was another marketing video, right?
Mhm.
And everything's great, except, so here's Tracy's point. And we can talk about this, and we can do a little bit, but, you know, during this study period, and I forget what it was, 144, 1.4%, people died. You know, 13% had injuries, 76% of these things malfunctioned while a patient was there, right? You know, they had issues with burnt, broken pieces of instruments falling into patients, 15%, arcing of instruments, 10%, unintended operation, it does something you don't want it to do, 9%, system errors, 5%, and you know, the surgeon having trouble seeing at 3%.
I guess my question would be of the deaths, how does that compare to other surgeries?
Sure.
Right, I mean, it's important to put that.
And that's certainly a reasonable question, and I don't know from this, but, I mean, it brings up new sort of considerations, right? Where it's not a marketing perspective anymore, and to be fair, at the end of at least the company's marketing videos, I don't know that Loma Linda Health put in one, but at the end of the marketing company videos, or the Da Vinci Intuitive Systems, I think, there's a disclaimer, right? But there's a disclaimer on aspirin and everything else, so they're not necessarily considered the same way as all of the, here's all the good stuff side, right? You look at it, I look at it as, well, they had to put that in there because the lawyers did it, right? Apologies to lawyers, but
You don't need to apologize.
I mean, that's, you know, I went to, where was I? I was at Oregon Health and Sciences University and giving a talk there, and I went into the restroom, and there's a sign in the stall that says, do not drink the water, non-potable. And so you think that the reason there's a sign there is because somebody did that. Why, right? Is that why? often something happens. The kids get folded up in the strollers and whatever, right? But at any rate, so I'll stay away from the bathroom. So back to this. And so now we've got a little girl. Whoops. Whoops.
For children with spinal muscular atrophy, life is a challenge. Developing muscle weakness between the ages of 6 and 12 months, these children often cannot stand or walk without help. The Spanish National Research Council has introduced an exoskeleton for these children that will help them walk for up to 5 hours. Still in the preclinical phase, the developers hope to make it available to medical facilities. Made for children between the ages of 3 and 14, this 26-pound device consists of support rods which fit around the user's legs and torso that can be adjusted as the child grows. With 5 motors in each leg that mimic human muscles, the model includes intelligence joints, which adapt to the symptoms of each child by automatically altering the brace's rigidity. Helping children with SMA stay active and avoid further complications from immobility make this a worthy and wonderful
Sorry, cut that off. But are there issues here? What principles apply to this technology? Sure. And this isn't the only version of this, but this is one. Any other issues?
I kind of see it as an issue of respect, honestly. In that there can be, I think, a movement away from the appreciation of the individual characteristics and toward creating a kind of a mono, like, is this really the best?
It's more important to walk
resource?
than anything else.
Right, right, so that, yeah, I mean, and any individual has so many things to offer to create this kind of a focus for anyone. I just, yeah, it just seems disrespectful to me.
In some respects, but what about from her perspective?
I don't know that the child is making.
Sure, but so I picked a child. I could have picked older people.
Right.
There's certainly lots of, these devices on people that
Right,
are of the, age to be able to make their own decisions.
right, and I think that's an important distinction.
Okay.
Similar to a cochlear implant for a deaf person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so then it's the stakeholders, right? Cochlear implant. Sometimes parents my wife works with people that get them or may get them, have the conversation at least. And so sometimes parents are in favor of, sometimes they're not in favor of, right? And the child has some opinion, but they're not of legal age to be able to voice that opinion yet, right? It gets a little bit complicated, right? Okay, so similar sort of technology.
leaps in eliminating physical barriers created by age, sex, and strength. Recently, their satellite company ActiveLink has created a new power assist suit, the Ninja, or PLN-31. This innovative exoskeleton is designed to lighten the load on any worker. An upgraded version of the Ninja lower body suit, the PLN-31 adds power to both the upper and lower body, making any task easier, regardless of physical strength. Worn by a member of the pit crew in 2015 Suzuka 8-hour endurance road race, the Ninja more than proved its worth. The company hopes to have the power assist suit available by 2017. ActiveLink has also developed the mighty MS2 Power Loader, a mega suit that can be used during disaster relief, construction, and public works. These powerful exoskeletons are paving the way for a more productive future for everyone.
Wow.
So same sort of thing, right? But it's a different application, or maybe it's the same application. Could somebody, the guy that works in Lowe's and can't lift the big heavy thing without a forklift, now maybe he can do it, right? And so, it's same technology, or really similar technology, but used in a different way. And aside from the issues of the decision making from the kid versus the adult, here their ideas that will get rid of the issues associated with sex and age and impairment, right, to some degree. And so are there other issues that play here? Should people, it's viable because if the company doesn't have to buy as many forklifts, does that help? Does it go faster for the company?
Wow.
Thoughts?
Or is it just like any other technology, right? If you're a large company, if you're Amazon and you want all your people to be faster than this, then you
Sure.
buy them that, and Joe, warehouse down the street can't afford that.
Sure.
I mean, it's,
But, so who should the engineer move towards, right? I mean, the engineer's job is to do things that better society will say, right? And so if Amazon can get you your whatever faster, does that benefit you?
only if I want to buy from Amazon.
Sure. But that's a different conversation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the engineer, if Amazon's a client or whoever's a client, then the engineer wants to do something that improves, enhances, gives them more abilities, whatever.
So that's a company versus the public,
Sure.
in some ways. I mean, that's where you go back to your safety, health, and welfare of the public.
Sure. But, so I didn't put up, and I thought about putting up a slide of all of the stakeholders. And so the company's in there, in some respects. The engineering company's certainly in there. Then there's the client company. And then there's the public. The public includes parents of kids or families of people in the hospital that might get technology. And so there are lots of different ways of describing the public. We're saying who the public is. And that's not specified in the engineering ethics codes, right? So a lot of it's up for interpretation, right?
Did you, with your students, talk about the how you define the public? And I'm curious how that conversation went.
We didn't as much as we might have. But, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? But the way it's presented, there aren't different definitions of the public, it's just the public, right? And so, I think again, it moves away a little bit from the conversation about the patient versus the public, but in a lot of ways, not really. So do you consider, is the company now the patient, or is the individual worker the patient? Because they're clients from different perspectives, right?
Well, I guess I'm more comfortable, just in general, with this, because it's kind of like informed consent. I mean, the worker can choose whether they want to work there and use these enhancements. So it doesn't concern me as deeply as, even though it's basically the same technology to your point. But with this application, it doesn't seem as risky, and that's sort of a gut kind of a thing. Risky in terms of just, there's a choice there and some autonomy. It's a respectfulness and an autonomy and choice.
Okay. So what if we take this technology, similar technology, and we use it in a different way?
Imagine yourself piloting a terrifying giant agent of destruction through the streets of Tokyo, defending the Earth against alien robotic invaders. Aliens aside, such a war machine actually exists in the form of this 4-ton mega machine, Kiratas. This 13-foot monster of mayhem is capable of moving at 10 kilometers per hour. Kiratas is operated by a pilot from the inside or driven by remote control. Its giant hydraulic arms look ready to tear to shreds anything that stands in its opposition. The cockpit features full video display and touch panel controls. Kiratas can be outfitted with several weapons, including 2 Gatling guns that can fire 6,000 BBs per minute, and a LOHAS launcher loaded with water bottles. Auto alignment allows the pilot to lock onto any target, and the smile shot feature actually fires the Gatling guns when the pilot smiles. Let's just hope that pilot doesn't start enjoying it too much.
Oh my God.
I thought that was kind of odd, so that's the picture again. But same technology, and we've gone a long way from the little girl that's a paraplegic to war machines, right? And so who's our client now, right? Are there ethical issues about bringing this into war? There's a lot of work in the military about using exoskeletons to make surgeons or make soldiers better, right? But it gets
Star Wars coming too.
well, but it gets more complicated, right? And again, it's whose perspective do you consider? Which side, which facet are you looking at it from? It's not that different than the athlete. Let's better the athlete, let's better the soldier. From a country's perspective, from the military's perspective, that's what you need to do, right? We need an advantage, or maybe it's just that if we have this technology, people aren't going to fight us, right? I mean, that's a lot of the argument for amassing nuclear weapons. Thoughts on this? Is it worse? Is it easier to see this technology on a little girl or somebody that can't walk, or is it, I mean, the smiling picture is sort of strange, but anyway. So, anyway, Bill talked about artificial intelligence. Boston Dynamics is a company that makes robots. And so, this is a robot. So from an engineering perspective, that's really cool. And that's really complicated to do all of that. But it could be used in lots of different ways, right?
They could compete in the Olympics.
Sure. Maybe
Nice
someday.
floor routine. Nice floor routine there, right?
Maybe someday. And so these were the conversations that we had. And then we came back around to the ethics initiative principles. And the point, what I tried to do was to present an example where maybe it was easier to see that it was beneficial to someone, society, the public, the patient, whatever, from different perspectives, right? And how do you define the public? How do you define the patient, the client? But then the other side of it was that same technology or similar technology also has problems. The robotic surgeon isn't as good as the marketing video, maybe. But the interesting question. So I did some work with Merck Sharp and Dohme Pharmaceutical Company, and the bone field, the bone industry. My work is geared towards osteoporosis, and so bone biology groups are trying to prevent or help people with osteoporosis, prevent them from suffering fractures. Lots of morbidity and mortality associated with fractures, and we won't go into that as much, but it's a big problem. It's a big public health problem. And so Merck had this drug, Cantepsin K inhibitor, Vodanicativ it was called, and it was doing really well. They moved through the FDA in clinical trials, and they're in a phase 3 clinical trial, and they have some 14,000 patients in this trial. And 30 years, Merck has had a bone biology group. Over a weekend, they stopped this drug. They stopped the bone biology group. They got completely out of the business because a small percentage, in terms of this 40,000 or 14,000 people, the people that had the drug versus the people that didn't, there were, trying to remember the numbers, it was like 15, 20, 30. More people on the drug had cardiovascular issues or strokes. Lots of people had strokes anyway. The numbers were in the thousands, 3,000 or so on both sides, and a few more. So there's a little bit more risk with this drug. But if it helps all these other people, who's the public and who's the patient, right? So, and there are other examples like that, but those are the conversations that we had. And, hopefully I introduced some thoughts to people that hadn't had them before. And I pose this as you're a little kid, it's Friday afternoon and you get to watch movies, right? And so, but there's some work and some mental processes associated with it, and that was sort of the point. Let's ease into it. Let's be anonymous about what our opinions are, and then let's discuss them, and let's see what we all think. And certainly we didn't come to a consensus, or that wasn't the point, but the point was to present an opportunity for people to think about it a little bit more. So,
Very good.
that's my call.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. I saw so many business aspects of it.
Right.
I mean, the marketing, the
Right.
product development decisions, the use of the technology. Really good. I wish that we had the athletic training.
Yeah, that'd be
People
interesting.
here.
I was curious what the students' response was, their feedback on it. Did you feel like it was a valuable learning?
I think it's like every
opportunity?
group of students, some people did a better job of incorporating than other people do.
Yeah.
And some of it, with the Curitas guy at the end, there was the macho response from some of them, and ended up being sort of a childish response, I think. But other people certainly thought about it. And some people thought about different situations or different examples in different ways. I thought it was useful.
I'm wondering, and I haven't been to all of the group discussions, but what I'm particularly interested in is whether any of you really have found a way to track or try to track a shift in behaviorally. So if there's, some sort of a entrance questionnaire or survey that teases in ethics kinds of questions, and then at the end of the course, you test again to see if there's been a shift in consciousness around that.
Maybe.
I did. Has
but
anyone tried to do that?
I mean, a lot of this, it's more in terms of activity, right? And they're not in positions where they can make these decisions yet. I mean, I think they've thought about them more, but whether they do the same when there are lots of pressures when you're in a job, right? And so if you're trying to make the client happy, whoever the patient or company or whoever, then ethics are important, but are some principles more important than others? Right? I mean, it comes into the mix, right?
Well, certainly. I mean, if you're teaching people how to think and think critically, and that's the role here, right? Then to me, it would be important to test the critical thinking skills, including keeping all principles of ethics as a part of a decision-making process.
I can follow in on that because everybody does their projects differently. A few years back, Matt Metzger was an ethics fellow, and he had a Teams class from the Bachelor of Innovation. And what he did, because he had different groups and he was able to, different sessions, he was able to put in something like this in one group,
Right.
groups, and then others, and then they actually did surveys, especially at the end or when you graded their final projects. And the ones that had the ethical principles that really relate to almost anything, and it was top of mind, actually when they were working with their business or the company that they were working with, included more of the ethical considerations in their assessment and their recommendation than the other group. And it actually got in a very big academic management learning and education journal. So it was a very high journal. So that was something that he did, because we don't fund research,
Sure.
but this is something that goes back to your point. It is we find it's really moving the needle. They're more aware of ethical issues. All of our end of program exams show that in the past 10 years, they've really increased the thought about ethics. But,
That's the hope, but you know, for engineers, they do have a requirement of an ethics class, but a lot of them take it over the interim and it's something to cross off the list is the unfortunate reality, right? And so it was just, I took it as an opportunity to, maybe you need to think about other sides of this. Engineers are taught that let's find a problem or somebody will give us a problem and we're gonna fix it,
Right.
right? And that's what they should be taught, but there are other things to consider is the point.